I'm 73 years old, and for 41 years I've carried the guilt of watching the most courageous woman I ever knew disappear into darkness because I wasn't brave enough to believe what I'd witnessed with my own eyes. Before this cancer takes what little time I have left, I need someone to know about Rebecca Martinez, about the 3 months in the summer of 1983 when she and her 5-year-old son Tommy found sanctuary in the Adirondack Mountains under the protection of someone who understood domestic violence in ways that human law enforcement never could. My name is Robert Chen, and back then I was a 32-year-old New York State Park Ranger stationed at Cranberry Lake in the heart of the Adirondack Forest Preserve. I'd taken the job because I believed in protecting wilderness and helping people experience the healing power of nature. What I never expected was to become a witness to the most extraordinary case of protective intervention I've ever encountered, and my ultimate failure to prevent a tragedy that still wakes me up screaming 4 decades later. Rebecca was 24 years old when she first appeared at my ranger station on June 15, 1983, driving a rusted Toyota Corolla that looked like it had been used for target practice. Her left eye was swollen shut, her lip was split, and she moved with the careful precision of someone whose ribs had been recently broken. Tommy sat in the passenger seat, silent and watchful in the way children become when violence is the norm in their daily existence. She told me they were camping indefinitely, paying cash for extended permits while she figured out their next move. What she didn't tell me, what I pieced together from overheard phone calls and carefully observed behavior patterns, was that she'd finally escaped from a husband who'd been systematically destroying her for 3 years. Marcus Martinez was a Syracuse police detective with connections throughout law enforcement, military training that made him exceptionally good at finding people who tried to hide from him, and a reputation for domestic violence that everyone knew about, but nobody seemed willing to address through official channels. Rebecca had chosen the Adirondacks because 6 million acres of wilderness seemed like the only place on Earth where she and Tommy might disappear completely from someone with Marcus's resources and determination. She set up a semi-permanent camp at one of the most remote backcountry sites I'd ever seen anyone attempt to occupy, a hidden spot near Bog River that required a 2-mile hike through terrain that challenged experienced outdoorsmen, let alone a young mother carrying supplies for indefinite survival. For 6 weeks, I checked on them regularly, bringing supplies they needed but couldn't acquire without leaving trails that Marcus might follow. Rebecca was remarkably resourceful, creating a wilderness home for herself and Tommy that provided safety, education, and the kind of peaceful routine that neither of them had experienced during their marriage. Tommy thrived in ways that made clear how much the absence of constant threat meant to his development. But by late July, Marcus had tracked them to the general area through financial records, credit card usage patterns, and the kind of systematic investigation that demonstrated why he'd been successful as a detective. I started seeing unfamiliar vehicles near access points, finding boot prints that didn't match any registered campers, and discovering evidence of surveillance equipment positioned to monitor activities around Rebecca's hidden sanctuary. That's when things began happening that challenged everything I thought I knew about wildlife behavior and territorial protection in the Adirondacks. Surveillance equipment would be found dismantled without triggering perimeter alarms. Vehicles belonging to obvious investigators would be discovered with flattened tires and disconnected ignition systems. Most remarkably, anyone who seemed to be searching for Rebecca and Tommy in a professional capacity would report feeling watched and unwelcome, to the extent that even experienced trackers would abandon their efforts and leave the area. Rebecca noticed the protection too, though initially she attributed it to luck or divine intervention. Threatening notes left on her windshield during supply runs would disappear overnight. Men who followed her too closely on hiking trails would suddenly decide to change their routes. Food caches and equipment that should have been discovered by systematic searchers remained untouched and hidden. The truth revealed itself on August 23rd, when Marcus finally located their camp and arrived with 2 other detectives to retrieve his family, through whatever means necessary. What followed was the most extraordinary display of protective intervention I've ever witnessed, and the moment when I faced a choice between believing impossible truth and maintaining comfortable skepticism. Someone had been watching over Rebecca and Tommy for weeks, someone who understood that they represented innocence in need of protection from predators who used legal authority to justify violence. someone with the intelligence to recognize domestic abuse, the power to intervene effectively, and the compassion to risk exposure in order to protect a mother and child who had nowhere else to turn. When Marcus Martinez came for his wife and son that August morning, he encountered something that his training had never prepared him for. Something that spoke to Rebecca in words that gave her hope for the first time in years, that told her exactly what she needed to hear. "You're safe now." But I failed to protect what followed. When the moment came to choose between supporting Rebecca's account of what had protected her and maintaining my career in law enforcement, I chose the coward's path. I let bureaucrats convince me that trauma had created false memories, that stress had generated hallucinations, that reality was limited to what government manuals said was possible. My silence condemned Rebecca to a fate that haunts every day of my remaining life, and robbed the world of evidence that intelligence and compassion exist in forms we've never been brave enough to acknowledge. Rebecca Martinez first appeared at my ranger station on a Tuesday morning that started gray and drizzly, with low clouds hanging over Cranberry Lake like smoke from some distant forest fire. I was updating trail condition reports when I heard the sound of a vehicle approaching along the access road. Unusual, because most visitors came during weekends, and this was only the second week of what promised to be a quiet summer season in the Adirondacks. The Toyota Corolla that pulled into my parking area looked like it had been driven hard for hundreds of miles without stopping. Mud caked the wheel wells, the rear bumper was held in place with duct tape, and spider web cracks spread across the passenger side windshield in patterns that suggested impact damage. When the engine finally died, it made the kind of grinding sounds that indicated mechanical problems too expensive for most people to fix. Rebecca emerged from the driver's seat, moving with careful deliberation that immediately triggered my training in recognizing signs of physical trauma. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, the purple and yellow bruising indicating injuries that were maybe 3 days old. Her lower lip showed healing splits, and she held herself in the protective posture of someone whose ribs had been recently damaged. Everything about her body language screamed recent violence, but her eyes carried a determination I'd rarely seen in domestic abuse survivors. Tommy climbed out of the passenger seat with the silent watchfulness of a child who'd learned to evaluate adult moods for signs of impending danger. He was small for 5 years old, with dark hair and his mother's intelligent brown eyes, but there was something in his alertness that reminded me of prey animals constantly scanning for predators. He stayed close to Rebecca's side, never straying more than arm's length away, as if proximity to her was his only source of safety in an unpredictable world. "We need extended camping permits," Rebecca said without preamble, her voice carrying the efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation during the long drive north. "Indefinite duration, backcountry access, full wilderness privileges. We'll pay cash in advance for whatever duration you're authorized to approve." I'd handled thousands of permit requests during my 8 years as a ranger, but this one set off alarm bells that went beyond her obvious injuries. Extended permits required detailed itineraries, emergency contact information, and equipment verification that most people weren't prepared to provide on short notice. Rebecca had come prepared with maps marking specific coordinates, supply lists that demonstrated serious wilderness knowledge, and enough cash to cover 6 months of permit fees without blinking. "Ma'am, backcountry camping for extended periods requires considerable preparation," I explained, studying the topographical maps she'd spread across my counter. "The sites you've marked are pretty remote. Difficult access, no facilities, minimal opportunities for resupply. Are you experienced with wilderness survival techniques?" Rebecca's smile was tired but genuine. "My father was career military, stationed at Fort Drum before it was Fort Drum. He taught me to live off the land because he said you never knew when the world might fall apart and you'd need to disappear for a while. I think that time has come for Tommy and me." She wasn't lying about her outdoor skills. The equipment in her car represented serious wilderness preparation, water filtration systems, lightweight camping gear designed for extended use, medical supplies that went far beyond basic first aid, and food stores that could sustain 2 people for months if carefully managed. She'd planned this escape with military precision, anticipating needs and challenges that casual campers never considered. But what struck me most was the relationship between Rebecca and Tommy. Despite the obvious trauma they'd both endured, there was a tenderness and trust between them, that spoke of a mother who'd protected her child even at tremendous personal cost. When Tommy grew tired during our lengthy permit process, Rebecca lifted him onto her lap despite her obvious physical pain, stroking his hair while he dozed against her shoulder. "Is there someone I should contact if you don't check in regularly?" I asked, following standard protocols for extended wilderness permits. The question was routine, but Rebecca's reaction was immediate and fearful. "No," she said firmly, holding Tommy a little tighter. "No emergency contacts, no check-in schedules, no outside communication whatsoever. We're completely self-sufficient, and we intend to remain that way for the foreseeable future." I processed their permits according to regulations, but made mental notes to check on them regularly through unofficial visits. Something about Rebecca's situation triggered every protective instinct I'd developed during 8 years of helping people navigate wilderness challenges. She was clearly running from something dangerous, and the Adirondacks had become her last refuge. Over the following weeks, I learned to recognize Rebecca's routine during her infrequent supply runs to my station. She'd arrive early in the morning, moving quickly through essential transactions, always scanning the area for signs of surveillance or unwelcome attention. Tommy would wait in the car, patient and alert, while she purchased basic supplies that couldn't be found or improvised in wilderness settings. During one of these visits in early July, Tommy asked me a question that revealed more about their situation than hours of conversation with Rebecca had disclosed. "Mr. Chen," he said while his mother was reviewing trail maps, "do monsters live in forests?" "What kind of monsters, buddy?" I asked, kneeling to his level. "The kind that hurt mommies," he replied with the matter-of-fact tone children use when discussing their greatest fears. "Mommy says the forest monsters are different from house monsters, but I don't understand the difference." That's when I understood that Rebecca hadn't chosen the Adirondacks for their beauty or recreational opportunities. She'd chosen them as a fortress, a place where natural barriers might protect her and Tommy from human predators who'd been systematically destroying their lives. What I didn't know yet was that the mountains had their own guardians, and that sometime during their first month in the wilderness, Rebecca and Tommy had attracted the attention of someone who understood domestic violence in ways that human authorities never could. By mid-July, Rebecca and Tommy had established a wilderness routine that demonstrated remarkable adaptation to backcountry living. Their hidden campsite near Bog River had evolved from basic survival shelter into something approaching a sustainable homestead, complete with water filtration systems, food preservation techniques, and educational activities that kept Tommy engaged and learning, despite their unconventional circumstances. I made unofficial visits to their camp every few days, bringing supplies they couldn't acquire without leaving the wilderness, and checking on their welfare in ways that went beyond standard ranger responsibilities. What I found consistently amazed me. Rebecca had created not just a sanctuary from the violence they'd fled, but a genuine home where Tommy was thriving in ways that made clear how much constant fear had been affecting his development. The boy who'd arrived silent and watchful had transformed into someone who laughed, explored, and showed the natural curiosity that healthy 5-year-olds display when they feel safe. He'd learned to identify edible plants, understand weather patterns, and navigate through dense forest with confidence that suggested real comfort in wilderness settings. Most remarkably, he'd stopped the hypervigilant behavior that had characterized his first weeks in the mountains. Rebecca's own healing was equally profound. The defensive posture and constant anxiety that had defined her initial arrival had been replaced by a calm competence that spoke of someone finally able to breathe without fear of immediate violence. Her physical injuries had healed cleanly, but more importantly, she'd begun sleeping through the night without the nightmares that had plagued her first month in the mountains. "It's like the forest is protecting us," she told me during one of my visits, watching Tommy build elaborate constructions from fallen branches and pine cones. "I know that sounds crazy, but I feel safer here than I've felt anywhere since before I got married. Something about this place makes me believe that Marcus can't reach us, that whatever power he has in the civilized world doesn't extend into real wilderness." But Rebecca's sense of security wasn't based entirely on geographic isolation. During our conversations, she began describing incidents that suggested they weren't alone in the forest, that something or someone was taking an active interest in their welfare and protection. Equipment caches that should have been discovered and possibly stolen by other campers remained untouched and secure. Food stores that attracted normal wildlife interest were somehow protected from the bears, raccoons, and other animals that regularly raided inadequately secured supplies. Most remarkably, the hiking trails that led to their hidden campsite seemed to become naturally obscured overnight, as if someone was deliberately concealing the routes that might guide unwelcome visitors to their location. Yesterday I found fresh firewood stacked near our camp. Rebecca mentioned during a supply visit in late July. Cut to perfect lengths, seasoned properly, arranged in ways that would keep it dry even during heavy rain. Tommy and I didn't cut that wood, and we certainly didn't stack it. Someone has been helping us, but I've never seen who it might be. The assistance was becoming increasingly sophisticated and obviously intentional. Rebecca would wake to find that tarps had been adjusted during the night to provide better weather protection. Water containers would be refilled from sources she hadn't known existed. Paths through difficult terrain would appear to have been cleared of obstacles that had blocked passage the previous day. Most significantly, Rebecca began noticing that anyone who seemed to be searching their area in a professional capacity would experience what she described as aggressive discouragement from unknown sources. Hikers with military bearing would report feeling unwelcome to the extent that they'd abandon their activities and leave the region. Vehicles with government plates would develop mechanical problems that forced their occupants to seek assistance elsewhere. Tommy was the first to make direct contact with their mysterious protector. During one of my August visits, he described an encounter that challenged every assumption I held about wildlife behavior in the Adirondacks. "The big man helped me yesterday when I got lost looking for pretty rocks," Tommy told me with the casual, matter-of-fact tone children use when describing events that adults find impossible to believe. "He's really tall and has fur like a bear, but he talks like people and his eyes are sad like mommy's used to be." Rebecca confirmed that Tommy had indeed become separated from her during a morning foraging expedition, and that he'd returned several hours later with detailed knowledge of trails and landmarks that he couldn't have discovered on his own. More puzzling, he'd brought back medicinal plants that Rebecca recognized from her father's military survival training, but had never seen growing in their immediate area. Tommy says the big man told him that sad mommies and scared children are always safe in his forest, Rebecca explained, watching her son play with carved wooden toys that had appeared in their camp overnight. "He says the big man promised that nobody who hurts families can find them here, because this is where broken people come to get better." The carved toys were remarkable examples of craftsmanship that demonstrated both artistic skill and intimate knowledge of what would appeal to a 5-year-old child. Miniature animals with moving parts, puzzles that taught spatial reasoning, and educational toys that helped Tommy understand forest ecology in ways that formal education could never provide. But what convinced me that something extraordinary was happening was the change in Rebecca's demeanor after Tommy's encounter. The residual anxiety that had characterized her behavior since arriving in the mountains had been replaced by genuine peace, the kind of deep calm that comes from knowing that protection is real and reliable. "For the first time since I got married, I'm not afraid of falling asleep," she told me. "Whatever is watching over us understands what we've been through, and I trust completely that nothing bad will happen to Tommy as long as we stay in these mountains." The trust would prove to be well-founded, but also tragically limited by forces beyond their mysterious protector's ability to control. By early August, Marcus Martinez had tracked Rebecca and Tommy to the general region through the kind of systematic investigation that demonstrated why he'd been successful as a detective. Credit card usage patterns, witness interviews at gas stations along their escape route, and careful analysis of Rebecca's childhood connections had led him to the Adirondack area. Now he was conducting the kind of methodical search that would eventually locate their hidden sanctuary, regardless of how well it was concealed. I started seeing evidence of his investigation during my regular patrols. Unfamiliar vehicles parked at trailhead access points, strangers asking detailed questions about long-term camping permits, and the kind of surveillance equipment that suggested law enforcement involvement rather than casual tourist interest. Marcus wasn't working alone. He'd convinced colleagues that Rebecca had kidnapped Tommy during a custody dispute, creating official justification for what was essentially a manhunt. The most disturbing aspect of Marcus's search was how he used his law enforcement credentials to commandeer local resources. County sheriffs provided access to helicopter surveillance, state police shared communication frequencies, and federal agencies offered technical support that treated Rebecca like a fugitive rather than a domestic violence survivor. The entire apparatus of legal authority was being mobilized to return a woman and child to someone whose violence had driven them into wilderness hiding. Rebecca sensed the increasing danger during her final supply visits to my ranger station. The confident peace that had characterized her previous month in the mountains was being replaced by the hyper-vigilant anxiety I'd seen when she first arrived. She moved more quickly, spoke more quietly, and constantly scanned her surroundings for signs of surveillance or threat. "They're getting close, aren't they?" she asked during what would prove to be our last conversation. "I can feel it in the air. The way predators change the energy of a place just by being near. Marcus has that effect. He makes everything feel dangerous even when he's not visible." I tried to convince her to contact domestic violence resources, to seek protection through official channels that might provide legal alternatives to wilderness hiding. But Rebecca understood better than I did how law enforcement networks function when one of their own is involved in domestic violence. "Marcus has friends throughout the system," she explained while purchasing what appeared to be final supplies for extended isolation. "Judges who will believe his version of events, prosecutors who will treat me like a criminal for protecting my son, social workers who will return Tommy to his father, because that's what the paperwork indicates is appropriate. The only protection we have is staying where legal authority can't reach." But even the vast wilderness of the Adirondacks couldn't provide complete sanctuary from someone with Marcus's resources and determination. On August 20th, I discovered surveillance equipment positioned to monitor activities around Rebecca's area. Motion sensors, wireless cameras, and communication devices that indicated professional-grade tracking operations. More ominously, I found evidence that the mysterious protective presence that had been shielding Rebecca and Tommy was taking increasingly aggressive action against Marcus's investigation. Surveillance equipment would be found dismantled overnight. Vehicles would develop mechanical problems that forced their operators to abandon their missions, and search teams would report feeling so unwelcome in certain areas that they'd voluntarily retreat rather than continue their activities. "Something is actively protecting them," I reported to my supervisor, trying to find ways to discuss the situation without revealing my personal involvement in Rebecca's case. "The wildlife behavior in that region has become unusually territorial, almost aggressive toward human intrusion. We might want to consider posting warnings about unusual animal activity." But my supervisor's response revealed that higher authorities were already aware of the protective intervention and were treating it as a problem to be solved rather than a phenomenon to be respected. Federal agencies with experience in unusual wildlife management were being brought into the investigation, equipped with specialized tranquilizer weapons and containment equipment designed for large, intelligent animals. The final confrontation came on August 23rd, when Marcus finally located Rebecca's hidden campsite and arrived with backup that included not just fellow detectives but federal agents who'd been briefed on the unusual territorial behavior that had been protecting his targets. They came prepared for resistance from unknown sources, armed with weapons designed to neutralize threats that conventional law enforcement tactics couldn't handle. I arrived at the scene just as the confrontation was reaching its climax, drawn by radio chatter that indicated officer safety issues and unusual wildlife intervention in progress. What I witnessed challenged every assumption I held about the boundaries between human and non-human intelligence, about the nature of protective instincts, and about what kinds of consciousness might exist in wilderness areas we thought we understood. Standing between Marcus's heavily armed team and the concealed location where Rebecca and Tommy were hiding, someone was making a stand that transcended species boundaries. Someone who understood that domestic violence was about power and control, that legal authority could be used to justify systematic abuse, and that sometimes protection required direct intervention against predators who used official credentials to hunt their victims. The being that emerged from the forest to confront Marcus Martinez was exactly what no rational person could accept, but undeniably present and obviously determined to protect the innocent family that had found sanctuary in his territory. nearly 9 feet tall, covered in dark fur, moving with intelligence and purpose that made clear this was no random wildlife encounter. But most remarkably, he spoke. In clear English that carried authority and compassion in equal measure, he addressed Rebecca directly. "You're safe now. No one who hurts families can reach you here." That's when I faced the choice that would define the rest of my life, and when my cowardice condemned Rebecca to a fate that still haunts every day of my remaining existence. The moment that changed everything happened at 11:47 a.m. on August 23, 1983, when the being Rebecca and Tommy had come to know as their protector stepped into the clearing where Marcus Martinez and his team had cornered them after 3 months of systematic hunting. I watched from a concealed position 50 yards away as something impossible became undeniably real. As the guardian who'd been protecting an abused mother and child finally revealed himself completely to confront the predator who'd driven them into wilderness exile. He was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, standing nearly 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur that seemed to absorb morning light, moving with the controlled power of someone who could destroy everything in his path, but chose restraint instead of violence. His face combined human intelligence with features that spoke of evolutionary paths divergent from our own, but his eyes held depths of compassion and determination that were unmistakably familiar. Marcus and his team, 3 fellow detectives and 2 federal agents equipped with specialized tranquilizer weapons, froze in positions that revealed their complete lack of preparation for this encounter. All their planning had focused on subduing Rebecca and recovering Tommy. With contingencies for possible resistance from unknown wildlife, none of their training had prepared them for direct confrontation with something that demonstrated obvious intelligence and clear protective intent. "You're safe now," the being said to Rebecca, his voice carrying authority that seemed to settle over the clearing like physical presence. The words were clearly enunciated, unmistakably English, delivered with tone that combined reassurance and warning in ways that made his message clear to everyone present. "No one who hurts families can reach you here." Rebecca's response was immediate and profound. The terror that had characterized her expression since Marcus's arrival transformed into relief so complete that she collapsed to her knees, gathering Tommy against her body while tears of gratitude streamed down her face. For the first time in months, she looked like someone who believed absolutely in her safety. But Marcus's reaction revealed the mindset that had made him so dangerous to his family and would prove lethal to their protector. Instead of recognizing the intervention as protection for innocent victims, he saw only a threat to his authority and an opportunity for career advancement that would compensate for the embarrassment of having his wife successfully escape his control. "Tranquilize the subject," Marcus ordered his team, drawing his sidearm while federal agents prepared specialized capture equipment. "We've got a Class A cryptid protecting fugitive suspects. This is exactly what we've been hunting for." What followed was the most courageous act of protection I've ever witnessed, and my most shameful failure to support truth over institutional loyalty. The being who'd spent months carefully protecting Rebecca and Tommy from their abuser placed himself directly between the armed team and the family he'd sworn to defend, knowing that his intervention would probably cost him his freedom or life. The tranquilizer weapons were designed to drop large animals instantly, but the being's physiology processed the drugs differently than expected. Though obviously affected by the chemicals coursing through his system, he remained conscious and mobile long enough to ensure Rebecca and Tommy reached safety before collapsing in the clearing where Marcus's team could secure him with restraints designed for dangerous wildlife. His last words before the drugs finally overcame his system were directed at Rebecca. "Remember that kindness exists. Teach your son that not all strength is used for cruelty." Rebecca tried to run to him, tried to position herself between her protector and his captors, but additional tranquilizers intended for her ensured that both she and Tommy were unconscious when the beings who'd risked everything to protect them were loaded into containment vehicles designed for transporting dangerous specimens. That's when Agent Harrison approached my position and offered me the choice that would haunt the remaining decades of my life. I could file an official report documenting the extraordinary intervention I'd witnessed, supporting Rebecca's account of protection by an intelligent, non-human being who demonstrated understanding of domestic violence and capacity for complex moral reasoning. Or I could accept a version of events that attributed the morning's activities to stress-induced hallucinations, equipment malfunctions, and misidentification of known wildlife. Ranger Chen, you've been under considerable stress monitoring this domestic situation, Harrison explained while his team loaded unconscious bodies into vehicles that would transport them to facilities I'd never be allowed to know about. Prolonged exposure to traumatic domestic violence cases can create false memories and misinterpretation of routine events. Your report should reflect that Mrs. Martinez was safely recovered by appropriate authorities, and that unusual wildlife behavior was within normal parameters for territorial species protecting young. I chose the coward's path. I signed documents that erased everything extraordinary I'd witnessed, accepted reassignment to duties that kept me away from public interaction, and spent the next 41 years living with knowledge that my silence had condemned Rebecca to return to her abuser and her protector to imprisonment in facilities designed to unlock whatever biological secrets his people represented. The official record shows that Rebecca Martinez was returned to her husband after being located during a routine search and rescue operation. Tommy was placed in Marcus's custody pending family court proceedings that would determine appropriate arrangements for his welfare. No mention was made of protective intervention by unknown parties, and all evidence of non-human involvement was classified under national security provisions. Rebecca died 6 months later, officially from injuries sustained in a domestic accident that Marcus investigated himself. Tommy disappeared into foster care after his mother's death, his memories of 3 months under supernatural protection erased through techniques that governmental agencies had been developing for situations exactly like this. The being who'd told Rebecca she was safe, who'd risked everything to protect a mother and child from the systematic violence that law enforcement had enabled, rather than prevented, spent whatever remained of his life in underground laboratories, staffed by people who saw him as a research opportunity, rather than someone who demonstrated the highest form of courage. My cancer is justice catching up with a coward who chose comfort over truth when protecting the innocent, required more courage than I possessed. Rebecca trusted me to bear witness to the miracle of protection she'd found, and I betrayed that trust to preserve a career that meant nothing compared to the lives I could have saved.